All right. Well, good. Well, so let's get started. I'm glad this is finally taking place. It's been a few years since I've done something like this, and I know this is something that we want to continue to do because we have colleges all over the place. We have schools all over the place, and we want to get all these students to interact. We want the faculty to interact. So I really appreciate all the effort that Dr. Kaiser and Dr. Sanchez have put in, Dr. Linton, and to set this up. We've got students here. We've got 7 students at the law school. We've got, looks like, 4 or 5 in Galveston, and I think there's about 10 in College Station. My goal for this is for you guys, all the students here and faculty, to get to know each other through this program or through this class, and part of it will involve technology. So bear with us as we work through the system. As you can probably hear, there's a little bit of a lag time. I can hear it in the echo. But we'll work through the technology that we have here. You'll also need to develop your own technological capacity, because I don't want this to turn into an us versus them situation. We will have some exercises, negotiations, and some other things where I'm going to be putting you on teams. And the teams will involve somebody from College Station, somebody from Galveston, somebody from here. So you will have to learn how to use some of the technology. In the syllabus, I put in Google Hangouts because I think it's one of the easier ones to learn. If you have Skype, if you have something else, if you have apps on your phone that you can talk to each other, that's something that we'll bring into the course too. So that's just
say something quickly. Gabriel.
Yep.
Whoever is speaking, keep their mic on, but those sites where you're not speaking, we need to put it on mute so we won't get that echo.
Okay. So hopefully, I'm still hearing an echo, but I don't know where that's coming from. But I appreciate that, and hopefully we'll be able to play with this. As we said, bear with us as we learn with the technology here. So international water law. What I'm going to do, if this will work, I'm going to put my slides on the screen and go through a little bit of material that I have, and then we'll hopefully get some discussion going based on this. So let's see. All right. Can you all see my computer screen down in Galveston?
Yes, in Galveston.
All right.
Yes.
Good. Okay. So this is the International Water Law class. There's some websites that are going to be very important for this particular class. The first one is the class website. If you have the syllabus, a number of the syllabi had a slight variation on this address. They added an extra L at the HTM right over here. There is no L. So if you've tried to access this website with an HTML, it won't work. Basically, what I'm putting on this website is all the material that we have for this course, including the syllabi, the criteria for the different campuses, because we have different grading criteria here at the law school versus what's at College Station and Galveston. Make sure you get the right syllabus. The schedule is the same for everybody. So you should be able to follow the schedule. It includes all the reading. Here you go. All the readings for each of the classes. I may augment this at times by sending you additional reading material, but I think we're going to stick pretty much to what's on this schedule. Also be aware that on here I've got listed things like exercises, you see assignments, and so on. So this is always the place to go if you want to be updated on the syllabus and what is coming up for reading assignments and so on. I also have all the documents that are in the syllabus, the reading material, with the exception of the textbook. All of them are available. They're all linked in here the either PDF or to a website. So you should be able to find any of the material here. If any of the links don't work, please let me know and I'll get those fixed. The textbook for this class is the second edition of The Law of International Water Courses by Stephen McCaffrey, and will be about half of the readings for this class will probably come from the textbook. The last thing I want to highlight is the website, the International Water Law Project website. This is my website, and it has all the documents that you could possibly want for any kind of research projects, all the supplementary material that we have, treaties, many of the articles, they're all listed on this particular website. So those of you that were going to be doing any kind of research projects, this is probably one of the first places to go to do research. Fairly easy to follow in terms of the organization, so I'll leave you to follow it. I will point out one thing, that's the blog. I post on here about once per month or twice per month new interesting analyses about international water law issues. This one I just posted this morning, a new treaty on a transboundary aquifer between Jordan and Saudi Arabia. This was very unexpected, really fascinating development, and we'll probably come back to this particular case study when we come to transboundary aquifers. But if you all are interested, there's a way you can subscribe to this blog, and like I said, it's just once or twice a month something new gets added on here. All right, so back to the slides. I think everything else is self-explanatory on here. All right, so I passed out for reading 3 articles, and I failed to notice that 2 of them were from the Guardian. So I don't want to bias anybody, any particular source. I just went on today and found a whole host of other similar types of articles, and we won't go through them, but my question for everybody, and hopefully let's see if this will work. All right, my question for everybody is, and excuse, whoa. There we go. Hopefully you can see us now. All right, my question is, what's going on? I mean, I've been doing this for 15 or 20 years. I've never seen so many stories about drought, scarcity, water shortages, food shortages. I mean, you only got 3 articles that I gave you to read in the introduction in McCaffrey's book. What's going on? This is that interactive part that we're hoping for.
Anybody?
Yeah, anybody, please.
Okay. Well, I noticed that they discussed points like overpopulation. They discussed the climate change and also the resources that some governments may or may not have to accomplish their goals for the water.
Okay, so overpopulation, economic growth, climate change. What else? What else is going on? Would anything catch your eye from those 3 articles or the reading in McCaffrey's book? Anybody here?
Aren't adequate to stay up with the growth.
Say it again, George. I just turned it.
You heard it. They didn't hear it.
Inadequate water supply for growth?
No, policies that help maintain, manage, and organize the distribution of water are not staying up with, one, the supply, nor with the people that are buying it.
So what you're saying is we have enough water, it's just we have bad policymakers, legislators.
We don't have enough water because we have bad policy.
Ah. As a global matter, do we have enough water?
No.
So we don't even have enough water on a global level, regardless of policy? Or do you think we can actually, if we had some kind of policy solutions, legal solutions, we can actually fix whatever problems we're seeing.
I don't think we have the economic ability to fix the problems we're seeing, regardless if we get everyone to agree.
Okay,
Talked about
a
inefficient.
little louder.
It also talks about inefficient farming practices in terms of irrigation.
Okay, so maybe efficiency in the economics, efficiency in farming practices,
The location of the water.
location of the water. What I want you to start thinking is, and I'm going to come to this in a little bit, but what's the problem? What is the it in this problem, or is there many of them? Because as I put on here on the slide, we've got stories every single day talking about water shortages, about drought, about people dying of thirst or dying of hunger because they don't have water to produce crops. We've got stories about modern farming that is inadequate to meet the needs. We've got businesses that are talking about water shortages. Businesses now have prioritized water as one of the most serious global challenges that they are facing. So something's going on here. Let me give you a little bit of background statistics, and then a little bit we'll have some more discussion. And I want you to think about how do you want to frame whatever it is. What is this problem that we're looking at? Is it one problem, multiple problems? How do we frame all these questions? So if you look at some of the problems we have around the world, almost 1 billion people, so that's about 1 in 7, 1 in 8 people around the world don't have enough water for drinking, clean water for drinking. More than 2.5 billion people don't have enough water for sanitation. You need water for sanitation, for hygiene, and so on. 5 million people die each year from disease. We have thousands of kids dying because they're dying from water diseases, because they don't have enough water. And the lack of clean water is the leading source of diseases globally, bar none. No question about that. Somebody, you mentioned population. Look at the population growth. Right around the turn of the last century, 1900s, a little after 1900s, the population explosion. And if you look, it's mostly in the developing world. All right? Now look at global water consumption. Again, that 1900 time period, it's kind of hard to put this into statistics, but the pace of global population growth and water consumption was relatively stable. And then right around World War II, it started to create a gap, meaning that our growth in water consumption was increasing at a faster rate than our global population. So each new person being born was consuming more water than their parents. Somebody mentioned climate change. The first impact you're going to see from climate change, most of the predictions suggest, are going to be on water issues, whether it's sea level rise or droughts or increase in storms and so on. And we're going to see the same thing here in the United States. You've got water supplies projecting to decline over the next 50 years. So this is a pretty serious situation. Let me make it worse.
Thank you.
We've got the last three, and I might be missing one, Secretary Generals of the United Nations. Boutros Ghali, who was an Egyptian, basically predicted the next major war in the Middle East is going to be over water. I think Kofi Annan and Ban Ki-moon have been a little more diplomatic and weren't as outspoken talking about war, but they're talking about conflicts and unrest And many people have suggested that the conflict in Darfur, the conflict in Syria, the conflict in many parts of the world have at least in part, a water problem, water challenge at their core. So back to my question. Well, let me start here. Is there a water problem, a challenge, a crisis, a water something or other? I mean, one person here says yes. Anybody in College Station wants to argue the point? No? So we're all taking this course because we believe there's a problem, yes?
I think one could argue that yeah, there's a problem with water, but it doesn't start with a lack of water per se. I mean, the Earth as a whole in the past 100 years, I don't know for sure, but I don't know if you can say that there's more or less water on the planet than there was 100 years ago. We know for sure that there are a lot more people.
Okay.
So, thinking about this issue, you have multiple variables in this problem situation. Some of the variables impact the system more than others. But I think the population growth overall is the key factor. It's not an issue of, water scarcity is causing problems with the population. The population is growing so fast, and the demand for the water is therefore growing with it.
Okay.
That it's the water issue is a can't think of the word, follows from
Okay.
the population issue.
So if our total global water supply stays constant, and has stayed constant for eons, but our population is increasing, somebody mentioned the bad policies. We need to create policies to stop population growth. No? Where are my Catholics? I mean, is that the approach? We need to legislate restriction. China had it right from the start.
So there were several Chinese students on the Mexico trip, and I didn't. Hopefully, I didn't seem insensitive, but I asked them if they had siblings back at home,
A little louder.
and asked if they had siblings back at home, and they explained that no, they were only children, and ultimately, explained that it was part of the population policies that one child per family, and kind of hard to really, I've heard of that policy in the past, but having met people that were part of it is totally different.
Yeah. Can you see us implementing a limitation, a restriction on population here in the United States?
Not in the near future.
Nope.
So if we're not going to create a population restriction, I mean, are we doomed?
Yeah, I guess it's a problem that has to be solved through technology and policies and science. So kind of all encompassing in business. So.
I think the policy has to come on restriction of water use itself per person, because you see the increase in water usage is higher than the increase in population.
Right.
So that's where the regulation has to come in.
Okay.
I had it on.
You folks in Galveston, I wasn't sure if you were trying to chime in.
Yes, I would advocate that you tie conservation to policy.
Okay. So conservation, maybe population restrictions.
And one of the things that is most unbelievable in the SWIFT legislation, which passed this last time, was that 20% of the projects have to be conservation. So this is a first in Texas that I know of.
Right.
Yeah.
All
So
right.
it's becoming popular.
So you're suggesting Texas has a water problem?
Yeah, some think that. The people in Wichita Falls. Ask the people in Wichita Falls.
Right? Yeah. Is it on the scale of a global challenge, or is this just a local challenge?
Challenge.
Global.
Let me, so back on my slides. the next question. Okay, so if we decide, and it seems like we have a consensus here, I suppose because you're all taking this class, that there's a problem with water. What is it? What is exactly that problem? Somebody mentioned population, bad policies. How do we characterize the problem?
A human problem, if you want to put it that way.
A human problem? We're at fault?
I would agree that I think it is a human problem. It's a human behavior problem. So in order, we have to change the way that people make their decisions on using water, because I think a major problem now is that, at least in the developed world, that they think it's either a right or that they're entitled to have water as a commodity, as something that they don't want to pay for, So I think part of it is education. We have to influence people to change their behaviors, whether that's on an agricultural level or an individual use level.
Okay, so it's a human knowledge issue, how we relate to water. If we change the way we relate to water, would that solve the problem?
I don't know.
It would ease the problem, perhaps.
Okay. Because I want to try to figure out how we characterize what the problem is, and maybe I need to put an S at the end. Is it multiple problems? And so, Patrick.
Oh, so how I would frame this problem or this issue is that there are, again, multiple contributing factors to the issue of water availability. Number one being population. As populations skyrocket, the problem of water availability gets harder to manage because there's more demand, and it's not a linear correlation. It's exponential. If you can't control population, then you need to look at all of the other variables, and it's not tackling one or two. You need to have a coordinated effort amongst all of the other potential contributing factors to water availability and demand to make it an impact.
Mm-hmm. So coming at it from a legal point of view, you're going to have a lot of laws on all these different factors and all these different impact points.
Yes.
We love laws here, don't we? In Texas.
I think we should raise the price of water.
Yeah, it's cheap, too cheap.
We don't treat it. I mean, let's start talking about treating water like we treat gasoline.
How much do you pay for water? I've got a bottle of water here that costs what, 50 cents at the Costco, 40 cents at Costco?
Walk at a gas station.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, if you can at a gas station, you pay $1 for this.
Mm-hmm.
All right. How do you compare this with 16 ounces of gasoline?
Three
Well, let's
times
make it
as much
easy.
for the water.
So let's make it easier. If you're talking about a gallon of gasoline, you're paying $2.50 right now, which is fairly cheap. And for the gallon of water,
You can find it under $1 if you look for it.
you go to the grocery store, it's less than $1, right? But then if you buy it individually, sometimes it's more if you buy the Fiji water, right? Because the shipping cost and so on. So what are we valuing more or less?
The point you made earlier, where the children of today are using more water than their parents did. It is a luxury that we have had, and we've not paid the cost for that. We are about to experience, some of us have already experienced that down here, because the Gulf Coast Water Authority has increased the rates for their water by 30% for the coming year. And that makes people down here aware of what the cost of water really is, because we've been getting it too cheap.
Yes.
All right, 30% sounds like a pretty big rate hike. Let me ask you, how much do you pay at home per gallon or per 1,000 gallons? Because I think you can usually break it down in 1,000 gallon increments.
$4.75.
$4.75 per 1,000 gallons. Yeah. So,
And as
yeah,
long
you could
as,
go to the grocery store. Go ahead.
As long as we continue to flush more down the commode than we drink, we're going to have that problem.
And when we get over,
Commode, it's the lawns and.
yeah. And when we get over the boogaboo of drinking recycled water, when we realize that the water we have in Galveston comes out of the Brazos River, and it has never been used before by anyone until it got here, right? So we are wasting water like crazy. And it is also an interesting thing because we have people in my neighborhood who think that they can grow new sidewalks, new driveways, and new curbs when they water their lawn in the middle of the day and spray water all over those. So anyhow, sorry, I'll shut up.
No, this is great because, okay, so we've brought up population, we've brought up efficiency in economics and industry, we've brought up pricing, we've brought up climate change. I mean, for us lawyers on this side, you know, our light bulbs are going up and going, oh, I've got a job. They're going to want me to write all these laws, and I've got to then help enforce them. I got to sue somebody if they're not being enforced, right? So, what do you guys think here, all the law students? From a science or a policy perspective, do you guys see it in the same way? That we need these regulations, we need these kind of policies?
The person who spoke in College Station, I think, hit the nail on the head, or one of the nails that needed to be hit about education. And I think that the folks in Dallas have done that with their Lawn Whisperer and whatever the program they had in San Antonio, where they've reduced. San Antonio's population has increased, its per capita use of water has decreased. And so it is possible to do that, to educate people. We've not spent money on doing that, and well, we need to spend money on doing that.
Okay.
Maybe should have a class in international water law somewhere, kind of, well, it's just a thought.
Building off of what you said, building off of what you said about San Antonio, one of the things that San Antonio water system has done is implemented tiered water pricing for those people who use more water. They're charged more. So I think maybe that's one thing. It's an incentive to conserve, to change people's behavior. So you could do it through policy, or you could do it through pricing. Those are other options.
I think many people will think that they're entitled to the water, and they'll be willing to pay whatever the price may be just to have it, because they think they're entitled to it. And I think if we try to implement laws, yes, that's what we would like to do, but a lot of people and lobbyists will go by why you want to restrict something that we are supposed to have.
So you're entitled. Does this mean you have a right to it?
I would say we do. We all live here.
Okay, so we have a right. This idea of a right, we're going to come to in, I think it's the next class or two classes. Is this a right that is enforceable under law? What's the source of that right? Can you sue for the right to water? I'm going to come back to this. I'm going to put that aside right now because that's a whole class topic. But the idea, well, actually, the woman who was speaking in College Station, I wanted to ask a question. The idea of tiered pricing, and Tom, what you were saying in Galveston, the idea of education and teaching all these folks like they've done in Dallas and San Antonio, is that transferable to Ethiopia, to China?
I don't think it would be in the same way. Yeah. I'm not sure because their problem is also availability in the first place. So in Texas or in the United States, we're using too much because we have the technology to make it cheap. Whereas in other places, maybe they can't. They have to walk 6 miles to a well to even get water, and even then, it's not clean. So you have to approach all of these water scarcity issues on a almost local or regional level to see actually what they need to do. That's my opinion, at least.
So we really shouldn't be having this class, this international water law. We really should be having a class in each location. Is that the suggestion? Dealing with local issue. Water's a local issue.
Well, it needs to be integrative on all levels, I guess. So internationally, we all need to be aware that this is a global issue, that water scarcity is a global issue, but at the same time, we need to take that information and go, all right, and then go to our local level and say, what are we going to do about it?
The reason I'm pushing this point is because trying to characterize what the problem is, it's really a challenge, because we have so many local issues, and the local issue in San Antonio is going to be very different than they are in Johannesburg, and very different than they are in Amsterdam. And yet we're still thinking, we still at least believe that there is some kind of a global aspect to it, or at least an international aspect to it. And so, and we'll come back to those things, but I want to push this further. And so, in trying to characterize the issue, what are the temporal, geographic, and political dimensions of the problem? Now, we've mentioned a few things, that they're local, San Antonio or someplace in Ethiopia. But what else can we extract that as a temporal issue, geographic issue, political issue? Yeah.
From a political perspective, I guess, but I would say it's probably all three of the different factors play a role. But from a political issue, it seems that societies are inherently more willing to seek conflict to, I guess, obtain their water as opposed to negotiate with each other. Or if that could just be cynical, I don't know.
Water is, what's the Mark Twain quote?
Whiskey's for drinking and water's for fighting over.
That's it. That's it. Yeah.
Although unfortunately, Mark Twain never actually really said that, unfortunately, but he gets credit for it.
Yeah, I've heard that. So it's been attributed to him. But just the very idea. So water is something we should fight over, or we do fight over.
Well, you mentioned it. I think you alluded to the ultimate issue. The World Health Organization a few years made a statement that said that access to clean, to a supply of clean water was a human right and should be treated as a human right. So from that, all of our fundamental questions become access and sustainability. When you mentioned the UN generals and their discussions and their projections for the future, you talked about this is what we're going to be fighting over in the Middle East, which is a perfect example because there hasn't been enough water there forever, and they've been fighting over water there forever. Water has been endemic in all of their boundary disputes because they can't build settlements where there isn't a supply of water, so it's a perfect example.
Yeah. Let me challenge you on that point, because and I don't want to spend too much time on this, because we're going to definitely come back to it. But there's a researcher named Aaron Wolf who has done some fantastic work researching water and conflict, and he's been doing this for about 15 or 20 years. He's at Oregon State, and his conclusion is we have multiple factors, more examples of cooperation over water between countries than we have conflict between countries. Internally, within a country, we have lots of examples of conflict. So, just something to think about. Domestically, we do fight with each other over water, but when it comes to between countries, he's made the argument that there hasn't been a true war or conflict over water between countries for more than 4,000 years. I think he cites to the city-states of Lagos and I can't think what the other one is called, but 4,500 years ago. Now, some people have suggested that some of the conflicts, the Six-Day War, Israel and Syria and some of the other Arab states, in part might have started over water, but there's very few other examples between countries. So just something to think about. But I want to go back to the point, and we will come back to this particular point about water and conflict and wars and so on, but as a temporal issue, as a geographic issue, as a political dimension, politically, let me throw out, we mentioned China. The domestic politics of China and population are going to be very different than the domestic politics and population in the U.S. I think you mentioned distribution, the location of where water is available. There's not enough water in the Middle East. Our neighbors to the north here, they only have, 35 million people? And how much water do they have? Fresh water? I mean, we should go rate them. No? So it's poorly distributed, and they're hoarding, aren't they? So what are some of these other temporal, geographic, political dimensions, maybe even some other factors that you want to extract for the point of trying to define what this problem or problems may be?
Say.
Where population gathers, for example, the large cities in Arizona. I mean, the Colorado River doesn't even reach the ocean anymore.
Yeah. So you're asking whether we should allow, we don't need to control population, but we need to control population movement and not allow Las Vegas and Phoenix and Tucson. Los Angeles, that's a desert. They moved the whole Owen Valley. I mean, have you ever seen Chinatown, the movie? I mean, yeah. It shouldn't exist. Los Angeles shouldn't exist in its present form. Right?
Yeah.
Nobody here from California wants to argue?
I would argue, I'm from California, and Northern Californians dislike Los Angeles for many reasons, one being they take all of our water. My dad would go on forever about that, but yeah, I mean, I totally agree. And there's going to be serious problems with the distribution of water in California and fights over it because, like I said, people in the north think it is theirs, and obviously Los Angeles is a very powerful area and gets a huge amount. So.
And they already moved to Texas, right?
Huh?
I'm already seeing people move to Texas.
Yeah, they're coming to Texas. Well, Professor Eckstein, I must commend you. Already you have alienated 2 members of the class in California and a Canadian who will you get next?
I've got my sights set very high. Let me tell you, I want everybody, I want the Canadians, I want the Californians, I want the Texans to really think about this, because is this a local issue? Is this a global issue? Should we be getting water from Canada and put it in a pipeline and deliver it to the American Southwest because we have a need? We have a human right to it, don't we? And we should.
No, we should have a human right to it.
If you want to pay enough for it, then sure, we'll ship it over.
But again, how do we? Go ahead.
It's a commodity. Let's treat it like a commodity.
Is it a commodity?
Absolutely.
In here, it might be a commodity. But does anybody want to argue that it's not a commodity? No? Yeah.
It's a commodity, I'd say, in developed worlds. It may not be a commodity in lesser developed worlds.
Oh, so it's a commodity if you're a developed country. Why is it not a commodity in developed countries?
Like, we take showers every day. People in Africa don't.
Okay.
So it depends on how you use it, and if it's needed for survival or commodity.
Think about it. After air, water is the very next thing that you absolutely need, and there is no substitute. There is no I mean, we've got gas and we've got oil and we've got solar and we've got wind and we've got hydro, all energy sources. We've got water. Beer doesn't count because it's made with water. Coke doesn't count because it's made with water. Wine, you need the grapes and they need the water. So can you consider water a commodity to the extent that we put a price on it everywhere, including in the developing world?
I think commoditizing it is a management practice. It doesn't mean that it's not a fundamental human right. It's a fundamental human need for water.
All right. Well, if we commoditize it, do we charge everybody the same rate?
No. You don't charge everybody the same rate on any other commodity.
On gas, we don't charge everybody the same rate?
No, absolutely not. No. California gas prices are far higher than they are here in Texas.
Okay, so we should charge more for water in the American Southwest than in the Great Lakes region.
It depends if you want to manage it with the law of supply and demand.
Okay. How about the folks who live in Appalachia or on the U.S.-Mexico border? Should we charge them the same amount? Like, let's say the folks on the U.S.-Mexico border, the colonias, should we charge them the same amount that we're charging in Galveston or San Antonio?
Well, if you try to do that, don't you run afoul of price fixing and other things which I don't know what I'm talking about here, but
Price gouging?
Price gouging or something of that sort. Isn't there
Okay, possibly. So we let the market take care of it, yes?
It's the way other commodities are handled.
What do you think the price of water will be in the colonias?
Oh, it's already outrageous now. You see what they pay for a barrel that's on wheels, a water wagon, as they call it.
Yeah.
It's outrageously high. It's far more expensive than what we pay for the water here in Galveston.
So where's the human right to water when they're paying triple or quadruple what we're paying here?
Well, something for nothing has always been a problem.
Okay. I guess what I'm trying to point out, we don't even know how to look at this problem. We don't. I'm not sure when I ask you the question is how do we characterize it, I don't have an answer. You can look at it from an economics perspective, you can look at it from a geographic perspective, you can look at it from 100 different perspectives. And we're not quite sure how to define this problem. I'm not even sure we know what the problem is, or there's so many aspects to the problem that we're really struggling to define it and to identify it and then to tackle it.
I tell you what has come out of this, what I think is hearing this thus far, we now certainly know that one size does not fit all. And until I started dabbling around in this and looking beyond Galveston County, I thought we'll solve our problem here. But as you get farther and farther away and you get to a place like you and I were back in, May, and seeing the people that were there, it takes on a whole new impossible, an impossible dream to think about trying to get it to work globally. So anyhow.
Yeah, I don't know if there's a global solution, but maybe there's some approaches that can be taken at the global and at other levels. But the question is, you've got to design your approaches in relation to how you define the problem. Yeah. And I'm not sure we've figured out how to define the problem yet. I've mentioned the temporal, geographic, and political dimensions. Let's see. There's also other factors: social, cultural, historical, religious. The Jordan River is considered one of the most holy places or bodies of water for Christianity. The Ganges River for Hindus. In the United States, we've got all sorts of water bodies that are very significant religiously for Native Americans. How do we take all those factors into consideration when we're trying to figure out water for drinking, water for agriculture, water for industrial purposes, and now we need water for religious purposes, economics and climate, I mean all sorts of issues coming up. So let me ask you this. What questions, if we're trying to figure out how to frame the questions and what are all these factors we have to figure out, what questions do we need to ask or do we need to answer before we maybe figure out the big pictures? If we have to start, tearing this apart into little bits and pieces, what would be some of the questions you would be asking?
You're looking for equity. I mean, you're looking for fairness, or and even, I don't know my word, but even-handedness. It has.
Well, I'm looking for something even more basic than this, and I'm really pushing. I want to push the students here, because how would you develop your research question? How would you what's your method for developing your research project here? If you know there's a problem, you're trying to figure out what that problem is, you don't know quite how to characterize or develop it, but you know there's something there. What are the questions that you're going to be asking? And this could be really tiny questions in relation to the big pictures, but what are those components? Yeah.
I think one of the components could be, what's the geographic area that you're trying to manage or control?
All right. What's the geographic area that you're trying to address? Is it the state of Texas? Is it the city of Austin? Is it North America? Good. What else?
You could ask questions like, you could ask questions like, how much water does each person essentially need?
Excellent. Excellent. How much do you need? Let me ask you that question right there. Do you think it would be the same in different parts of the world?
Not even the same in the local geographical area.
It's not the same in our local geographic area. But also, she was focusing on the word need. How do you define need, water needs?
Water uses.
Water uses?
In that area.
What do you use water for?
Well, if it's a farming area, you're going to use a heck of a lot more than if it's, an urban suburb.
Yeah.
I mean, if you've got 200 head of cattle to water, you're going to be using a whole lot more than somebody that lives here in downtown Fort Worth. Okay.
So your uses, the location, your needs. Well, let's start with a question that I haven't heard, that I think is even more basic. How much do we have? All right. This is our world, a world of salt. 97.5% of the water on Earth is in the oceans. It's still water. It's just really expensive to desalinate. We could provide it to people around the world if we want to invest in desalination technology on a global level. I think it would require a lot of energy, not just to desalinate, but also to take the salty or the clean water that we get from the oceans and deliver it into the interior. So at some point, economics become a real important factor. But if you look at the rest of this and you think about it, here's all the fresh water, and you've got groundwaters and glaciers, snow cover, and lakes and rivers as storage. Think about where humanity developed over the last 10, 20, 30, 50,000 years. What water have we developed on?
The surface and ground.
It's all the surface stuff. A little bit on groundwater. Groundwater did not become a major factor until World War II, when we developed pumping technology that could actually go to depth beyond. I think it's around 30 or 35 feet. It was the standard depth at which you could dig a well a few places we're able to come up with deeper wells around the world, but beyond that, you really couldn't pump it up. You had to haul it up with those old, cranks and buckets. But old technology pumps, where the ones you have to pump up and down, you're talking about 30, 35 feet maximum. World War II comes around, we develop gas-powered pumps, and now we can go down hundreds of feet. But before that, lakes, rivers, swamps, whatever we can find on the surface. And in fact, if you look at the percentage of how much water is in lakes and rivers as compared to total water supply, I mean, it's minuscule. Okay, so now we have pumping technology. We can go to groundwater. There's 100 times more accessible groundwater around the world. 100 times more accessible groundwater around the world than in all the lakes and rivers and streams and surface water bodies. So now maybe we go back to the question of where's that aquifer located? Is it in a location where we need that water or not? Okay, I'll put that aside for now because we'll be coming back to it. So back to the question, do we have enough water globally? I've got to say yes, we do. It's just not always in the right place at the right time in the right form. All the salt water just doesn't quite help us right now. And it's, as I said, it's too expensive to desalinate, at least on a global level. Where is it? Well, here you can see, we've mentioned the Middle East, not a lot of water. Canada, like I said, they're hoarding that stuff. Look at it. Now, of course, this is on a per capita basis. So Canada, with only 35 or so million people, and they have, I think, somewhere in the order of 100,000 cubic meters per person per year, as compared to the United States, where we're in the 4, 5, 6, 7,000 cubic meters per person per year. So Canada's got a ton more water than we do on a per capita basis, but they have a smaller population. Middle East, Jordan survives on approximately 100 cubic meters per person per year. So they're at 100, we're at 5,000 or so, Canada's at 100,000. So huge, huge disparities in relation to population, in relation to location. Very, very soon, China in the blue is going to go orange. I'm sorry, they'll change to yellow. Because right now they are struggling, and in fact, this map is from 2000. They may have already moved into the yellow sphere in terms of per capita allocation or availability of water. I'm going to come back to this concept of per capita availability of water in just a little bit. The question, what do we need it for? Well, up until about 200 years ago, the real emphasis was on navigation and transport. We needed it for irrigation and for water and for drinking, but the population was so small where we really got into conflicts with neighbors and cooperation with neighbors was over navigational uses. Industrial Revolution, that's when we really started to develop our freshwater resources, and that's when our population started to really grow, and now we have water needs all over the place. Agriculture, drinking, recreation. Well, most of the water goes to agriculture. That's where we put the bulk of our freshwater extractions into agriculture. On average around the world, it's 70%. If you go to the Panhandle, I think it's around 90 or 95% of extraction of groundwater. It's mostly groundwater. There's no rivers in the Panhandle, northern. 90-95% of water goes to agriculture. 22% for industrial purposes, 8% for human consumption and sanitation. And you can see that this is the projections, certainly for agriculture, are going to continue to increase, at least in terms of projections. What do we need it for? Well, looking at the last slide, now you see this slide. Different countries need it for different things, and where are they putting the emphasis, the bulk of their water resources? You see in the United States, we do use it for agriculture, but we also use a lot of it for industrial purposes. Whereas other countries, such as Canada, most of the water extractions that they use are going for industry. And right now, the energy industry in Canada is using a ton of water, mostly a lot of it going into the shale production in the tar sands and in that area. Different needs, different uses around the world. You can see in Africa, agriculture. That's the major use for water. And again, I'm trying to give you a bit of a frame of reference in terms of trying to figure out how do we define whatever the problem is based on all these factors that we've listed. And we're starting to ask questions, well, what do we need to know? So I'm just throwing out some information here. Somebody asked the question, I think the woman in Galveston asked the question, how much do you actually need? There have been a number of studies that have tried to come up with some kind of formulas. And the best one is called the Falkenmark Water Stress Index. And this is trying to measure availability of fresh water resources on a per capita basis. And Malin Falkenmark, she came up with this system. And the minimum adequate quantity of water availability in a country per capita is 1,700 cubic meters per person per year. Anything above that, and your country's doing pretty well. So Canada is at 100,000. United States, somewhere around 5,000. Well, when you get into the 1,000 level, that's the next yellow tube. That's where you're considered to be experiencing water stress. So between 1,000 and 1,700, you're experiencing water stress. When you're down to 500, you're experiencing high water stress, chronic water scarcity, and really anything below 500, 600, right around there is considered inadequate to exist as a nation. Remember what I said about Jordan? They're at 100. Israel is at around 300 or 400 because of their recycling and the huge desalination effort that they've implemented in the last 10 years. The Palestinian territories are somewhere around 75 cubic meters per person per year. In Jordan, by the way, you get water, I think, twice a week in Amman, in the capital. So that's the reality of how they exist. Yemen, the capital of Yemen, Sana'a, is supposed to be the first capital globally that will run out of water. Capital city of any country that will run out of water, and they're projected to run out of water. Somebody said around 2015. I think they've pushed it back another couple of years. It's supposed to be coming up in the next couple of years. Just no more water available because there's no rivers. All the groundwater has been depleted. You've got saltwater intrusion, whatever other aquifers you've had, and that's it. Desalination is their only opportunity, except Yemen is really, really poor, and so they can't afford to desalinate. So something to think about. Now, obviously, Yemen exists, and Jordan exists, and people in Palestinian territories exist, however well or not well. So you got to take these kinds of indexes with a grain of salt. But it is a marker that we can at least utilize, at least for purposes of discussion. So taking this a step further, using these kinds of markers, this is 1995 on the left side of your screen, projections into 2025. Even the United States, because of population growth, because of our rates of extractions, are projected to, on a per capita basis, to decrease to right around 1,700, 1,600 cubic meters per person per year. So we're going to be starting to experience water stress, at least as a national, as a country. Here in Texas, I think we have already begun experiencing. California, Arizona, the whole American Southwest. Look at what's happening in Georgia, Alabama, and Florida, in the Apalachicola, ATC, Flint, AFC, Apalachicola, Flint, Chattahoochee, I can't remember the other rivers. They just went to they're going to the U.S. Supreme Court because they are disputing over how much water Georgia's supposed to get versus Florida versus Alabama. There's not enough water in those rivers. And this is not the American West. This is out east where it's supposed to be, pretty wet. And we're experiencing this around the world.
So this stress is about surface water only, or that includes all?
This is supposed to be not just surface water. This is supposed to be all available water resources. So they are supposed to be, this map is supposed to take into account what they call accessible groundwater. Accessible groundwater refers to groundwater that is not too deep and not too challenging to, economically speaking, to access. Usually groundwater that is deeper than, I think it's 250 meters, becomes economically very difficult to extract. And it really depends on what water resources you have versus what you don't have. So in a country that doesn't have any water resources, that 250 meter barrier is not a barrier because you don't have a choice. So it really depends on what resources you have versus what you don't have. But these maps are supposed to be with reference to accessible. And what's accessible in one country may be slightly different in another country. All right, so back to trying to frame the question. So now that I've given you a little bit more information, more background on where the water is located or where it's not, how much water we have, who has it, what we use it for, how would you frame the question or the problem or the research? I mean, if you're trying to create a research plan, what are you going to do? Do you want to go with the human rights approach? Do you want to go the economics approach? Something else? I'm surprised a little bit. I'm sorry?
A great hush fell over the crowd.
Well, I'm a little surprised that nobody's brought up the more traditional approach, the way we've dealt with it, certainly in the United States, but also globally. Anyone? Come on, how many people have a 3-year-old or 4-year-old at home?
Right, I was going to say that oftentimes they frame it towards let's conserve for the future generations. So how do we make sure that there's enough water for our kids or our grandkids?
I'm very progressive, but I will tell you that my children, they're a little more than 3 years old, but they're still not that progressive. They still have a mentality of selfishness, mine, property. Think about it in terms of property. Texas is now at the U.S. Supreme Court over the Rio Grande River against New Mexico and Colorado. It's ours. At least that's what we're claiming. We just lost a battle with Oklahoma over the Red River. It's not. I guess it's not ours. We lost, right? It's theirs. Property. Is that the way we should address it? Is property?
Like a mineral right?
Mineral rights?
Wow. I mean, it's a possibility, but...
What's that? It goes... Well, I mean, if you have... Is water part of the surface estate? Water flows through your properties, through the property that you own or the state that you live in. Who owns that water?
Surface water doesn't go with the surface estate.
If it's you got to be louder.
Surface estate versus the mineral estate, and the surface water versus groundwater. That's deep.
Well, I mean, that's part of the question. If you take my U.S. water law, we address that issue. Is a river owned by the property in which it flows through?
That's the fight between Georgia and Florida now, isn't it?
That's the big fight between Georgia and Florida and Alabama. That's the fight between New Mexico and Texas. Think about it this way. Who owns the Rio Grande? Starts in Colorado, flows through New Mexico, then forms the border between Texas and that other southern place below next to us, Mexico. Who owns that river? Who should have a right to that river? And I'm completely ignoring the human rights aspect of it, right?
In that case, Texas.
Texas owns it.
I haven't taken water law, so I don't know about federal regulation.
What's that?
I haven't taken water law, so I don't know about what is the federal regulation on it, if any.
Okay. Do we have federal regulations? Do we have state regulations? Yeah, it gets very challenging because we started framing it from human rights and climate and population, economics. I'm throwing in ownership and property. How do you regulate that? Who regulates that? Who has a right to regulate it? So it may not be just an ownership issue, but it may be who has the authority to make decisions over that water resource. And then think about in terms of the political dimensions. Is it the same rule in Dallas that we apply as between property owners versus Texas and New Mexico versus the United States and Mexico versus Canada and Ethiopia? Okay, we have water that flows through countries or through properties, through counties, through states, and you have riparians. But what about non-riparians? Does Canada owe anything to Ethiopia or Sri Lanka or any of these other countries that have water problems?
Why would they? They have it by default.
What do you mean?
Well, because the glaciers and all the snow-covered areas, they have it by default.
Oh, they have the water by default. Okay.
Yes. It's like, for example, now the Middle Eastern hugs all the oil and the petroleum. That doesn't mean that other countries have the right to that.
So it's a property issue because it's the Middle East countries own that oil. Saudi Arabia owns its oil and it could sell it. So it's a property issue and an economics issue.
But they wouldn't get into the personal property issue if we're going to go the oil and gas route. Like, if I own the land that the water's underneath, then you have to pay me royalties for it or some sort of thing like that.
Okay. So Canada should just start putting up a for sale sign and charge more than $4.75 per thousand. I think they could get a better deal than that.
I don't think they legally owe. I don't think Canada legally owes Sri Lanka or anywhere else water, but we all probably owe a duty as humans to be good stewards through like water conservation instead of through not employing wasteful practices or whatnot. Maybe be more efficient.
But who do we owe that obligation to be good stewards to? Who do we owe that responsibility to?
Ourselves.
To ourselves. That's a very non-legal thing to say.
It's a moral obligation.
I'm improving my stance here. A little bit at a time.
All right, you're going to say moral?
It's a moral obligation. I mean, are you just going to let people dehydrate all over the world because you want to hog your water resources?
Oh, so we should get Canada to send water over in tankers or a big pipeline across to I don't know, South Sudan?
But we're letting people die of hunger right now.
Send them over.
It's like the same.
Is it because we have a moral obligation. Then we said we have a human right to it. Who do we owe this to, and under what circumstances, or under what authority?
To our future generations.
Somebody else mentioned future generations. So wait, so I now have to think about water for my grandkids who haven't been born yet?
Moral obligation, but then it comes down to the economics of how do we pay for it in terms of piping the water over to, say, Saudi Arabia or something.
Well, okay, so we have to throw in the economics. So do we temper our moral obligations by our ability to pay for it?
It's funny because right now we're doing it with the the carbons in the atmosphere.
Okay.
We are,
What
because
are we doing?
we are looking into the future, we're putting value on that, and we're trying to then pass that price that we're going to end up paying in the future to whoever is using it or putting the pollution the most right now out there.
That's an interesting comparison. Why are we now being so concerned about carbon production and climate change and so on?
Well, because one is leading to the other, according to the scientists and everything, and if we continue on that track, the pollution of the water, the air, and everything would be too hard. I mean, the human population would cease to exist at some point if it keeps going.
Are these comparable? The global climate change phenomenon, is it a comparable scenario to these water issues, water challenges?
Yeah, I think they're definitely analogous because they can only be solved on an international scale, as opposed to if we're just emitting things here, Canada could be emitting it, Asia could be emitting it, but until we all kind of group together to focus on the problem, then
okay.
And change isn't going to occur until we start feeling or have the perception that we're feeling a difference in temperature, or whenever you start seeing the effects of whatever the law.
So we're reacting because we're feeling the effects?
Yes.
Okay. And the effects are being caused by whom?
Humans.
Humans?
And the climate change because of it.
Okay, so around the world, and we have one global climate. So what happens in China is going to affect the climate in the United States. Can you say the same thing with water? What China does with its water resources, will it affect the United States?
China maybe because they're so big.
China what?
Possibly because they're so big and they have such a big impact.
Okay.
Well, also, there's a global water cycle, and there's this new thought of virtual water. So agriculture that you are exporting to other areas of the world, you're essentially exporting that water out of your local water cycle into someone else's. So globalization has really had an impact on our water resources in that way.
Think about it, because the impact of climate change, of producing carbon, of the smokestacks in one country, it's going into the atmosphere, and the atmosphere is taking it all around the world. And my question was, if we pollute water here in the United States, will it affect Sweden, or will it affect South Africa? But then we do have this hydrologic cycle, and we do have what's called virtual water trade. You put water into a product because you have to produce it, and then you sell it overseas. I don't know if it's there are some really strong comparisons with this climate change phenomenon.
Yeah,
I don't know if it could. What's that?
I said with the whole climate change thing, we all affect each other because rising temperatures increase evaporation, which wastes water. And also with saltwater intrusion and things like that. I mean, they're all interconnected, and it's all a global issue.
So again, trying to frame this question. First trying to frame what the problem is, and then trying to frame what are all these things, how are we going to approach this? What are the challenges? How do we want to respond? Because that's the ultimate issue, is how do we want to respond to this? Locally, San Antonio, nationally in the United States, Washington, D.C., or globally through the United Nations or some global treaty or some global mechanism. How would you want to respond to this? What's that?
All of the above. All of the above.
All of the above. Really complicated. Isn't it? Have we ever done anything that has responded at the all of the above framework?
Government.
What do you mean government?
We have the UN, we have our federal government, and we have our states governments, and we have our local governments.
Okay, so we have the governmental structures, but have we ever tackled an issue at all these different levels? Climate change, maybe? Might be the closest one.
Yeah.
Anything else that we've addressed at such different levels? Hunger? Have we addressed it at different levels?
Attempted to.
Yeah. I'm trying to see if there's any analogies out there, something that we can borrow from that might help us frame, again, the problem, the questions, the issues, what we're trying to deal with here. College Station has been really, really quiet, except for one individual. So I'm gonna pick on you guys right now. I want to hear what you guys think. All these questions, all the questions that I threw out before. I want to get some thoughts from College Station.
Well, I mean, how do you get certain? Well, how do you get certain areas that are not, they have plenty of water to care about the areas that, what you were talking about, the moral dilemma, but then if you go back to the issue of, well, if it's in our innate right, like we have a right to water, then who are you to say that I can't have your water if it's our right no matter what? It's like a civil right. Like, you can't take away my right, so why don't I have a right to your water? But then you have the government being like, no, it's my water. So it's, how do you address it? And then even all these sources of fresh water that we've completely ruined through eutrophication, like, I don't know. I just feel like we've been very irresponsible, and now we're paying the price. But how do we, it's the question you've been asking, how do we fix that? What do we do now when, are we too far gone? Is it overpopulation, or is it pollution, or, how do you tackle everything when everything is the problem?
Anyone else? College Station?
Hi, Gabriel. I just want to share something that Dr. Kaiser told me. He just left, so that's why I can share. He said that international law doesn't matter. Everything is local. That's what he said. So I'm challenging you. I'm challenging you guys to.
So that's why he left.
Exactly. He said that and then he left. So I wanted to share that with you.
Okay.
And to the law
Good.
students and say what, get their insights on that.
What do you think? Everything is local, and it's only a local solution. Local laws will fix the problem.
I think he's 100% correct.
Mm-hmm. I agree.
Okay, so scrap the rest of this class.
He's not there.
No,
he didn't hear that.
Yeah, I think on an international level, when you start talking about the moral ethics of it, we've got a population that continues to grow and consume more and more water. If we start bringing moral ethics into it and shipping water from, say, Canada over to the Middle East, all we're really doing is kicking the can a little further down the road, because essentially we're going to run out of water if the population continues to grow.
Okay.
So we have to find something else, other than a moral reason to do what we're doing and justify bringing that water over.
It makes sense because everybody says that when you want to do a change or change something, you start with yourself. So if you start with the individual, then that city, that county, that state, then you can deal with issues at least as far as conservation and pollution. And then when you solve or start solving those issues, maybe you then move to the international about the property rights and the ownership.
Has there ever been anything that has started somewhere and swept across the world other than Elvis Presley and hula hoops and Coca-Cola?
The only topic, the only subject area that I know of that might fit that is the concern over ozone depletion. In the 1970s, we figured out the 60s, 70s, we figured out there was an ozone hole, and it was going to affect the global community. We then effectively banned or reduced and then banned ozone producing substances like the refrigerants and so on, and we did it on a international level through a treaty that was implemented at the national level of all these countries, and which trickled down locally, but it was all national rules. That's the closest I can think of. That's not a local approach necessarily. That's sort of a top-down approach. I'm not sure if what some of you are suggesting is a top-down approach. But there was somebody in College Station, I think, had some comments.
Yes, I would not agree with it being just a local problem, because I mean, looking at an example like Sudan, so it would be like a local problem within the conflict inside Sudan, and then would come like the conflict about the Nile, and then when we look at it at like trying to develop some international solution for places where we have like excess of water with not that much of use, and then versus again what's going on in like Western Sudan. So I agree that it has to be looked at within like different levels internationally, and then within a continent, and then locally in the country.
The Nile River Basin is really fascinating because it has so many aspects of everything that we're talking about. So at the local level, I'll give you one example. The situation in Darfur, many scholars and politicians suggest that water was one of the leading causes of the internal conflict between nomads and farmers and different ethnic groups, some who were nomads and some who were farmers, and they were trying to find water resources for their particular activities. And that was one of the things, maybe not the final thing, but one of the things that sort of fueled the tensions and eventually the conflict. On the Nile River, we've had for years Egypt threatening to bomb anything that Ethiopia builds. And Ethiopia has long wanted to build a dam on the upper reaches of the Nile River. In fact, 80% of the water that reaches Egypt starts in Ethiopia. 80% of the Nile starts in Ethiopia. So whose water is it? Well, Egypt and Sudan have been arguing that there's a 1929 and 1959, two treaties that were entered into, and that allocated the majority of the water to those countries. But at the time, the upper riparians had no voice. They were not part of the treaty. They never were part of the agreements. So the upstream countries are arguing that that might be good for both of you, but we were never involved, and so we should have a right to that water. And because the water starts in Ethiopia, Ethiopia should have a greater right to that water. So now we're starting to talk about property and sovereignty issues and ownership and who should get it and how much. And in fact, when Egypt was going through its Arab Spring a few years ago, what do you think Ethiopia did? They saw the turmoil in Egypt. They started building a massive dam. And it's called the Grand Renaissance Dam, and it's now a big controversial point on the Nile River. Fascinating, really fascinating case study of what's going on in terms of the politics and the economics and the local cultures and so on. Any other thoughts? Any other comments? Yeah.
I think to say that international, water law doesn't matter and everything's local, I think is kind of maybe simplifying the issue on that level. I mean, there's problems at every level, whether I'm dealing with my neighbor, or one city's dealing with another city, or one state's dealing with another state, so on and so forth. To say that the international water law doesn't matter, I think, assumes that if you have a conflict, you're just going to go to war, or you're going to let your people die, right? The laws are in essence, an agreement between the countries to, try and work out the shortage of resources at hand, and to say that, it doesn't matter, doesn't seem accurate.
Okay.
Okay.
Well, I appreciate that comment. Yes.
I think I have one comment for the policy of water price. I think in China we already have the price for big city like Beijing and Shanghai. They have very high price than the rural place. But the thing is that in Beijing and Shanghai, people have high salary there, so they even do not care about use more water at home. But every time when I go back to my hometown in the rural area of China, my parents always told me to saving the water. So to me, the policy, we have the policy for the people in big cities to have higher price, but still it's not effective. So it makes that the poor people still saving more water in their hometown, but like the big city, the Beijing and Shanghai, they still, even though they have very high price for the water there. So that's the thing I'm really thinking about this. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, good. The class is supposed to go for another 20 minutes, I think, and we didn't take a break, so I'm going to go for another 10 or 15 minutes, and then at least we'll stop here. But I want to ask all the students, because I think all the students are going to be required to do a paper, certainly students here, and I believe all the other students. Does anybody have an idea of what they want to do? What area of water do you want to address of this big challenge, or what interests you?
Yeah, I might have been one of the first people to come up with the topic, but it's related to what I research. I look at radionuclide mobility going out of nuclear facilities, so I had already developed a topic on international laws regarding that. So nuclear powers produce a lot of waste that moves around, and so I was interested in looking into how different countries would have different concerns about permissible radionuclide levels, and what happens when too much gets into another territory and so forth.
George? That very interesting, and I wonder if you should also think not just in the context of producing the nuclear material, but if you have accidents like the Chernobyl example, where you had the fallout affecting not just agriculture, but it was affecting water resources and so on. So that would be interesting, very interesting. Good. Anybody else?
I want to pursue an examination of how that brackish water can be used to reestablish aquifer pressure. There's a huge issue in Texas about what stormwater, who owns it, where does it go, and how is it used. Well, we have an opportunity to use it for stabilizing aquifer pressure, and I think that it's a commodity and ought to be treated as such. So I want to explore that.
Okay.
Anybody else?
We wanted to look at education to change the emotional appeal of water. And from an international standpoint, looking at give them fishing poles instead of fish,
Good, good. More ideas, more topics?
Not yet. Anthony's thinking about how to sell that water from his hometown up there in Canada.
Yeah, that's what I'm gonna do.
Sell water.
Well, right now, that's it from Galveston. We've got three more than some of them. Okay.
College Station, any topic ideas there? No?
No.
Well, I'm
Not
going to
yet.
coerce someone down here into looking at the right of capture for groundwater. You know, that last ruling, I don't know that I understand it all, but if you own the property and you drill a well, you own the water down below it. That is strange. The state owns the top and the individual owns the bottom, so anyhow, one of these people will do that. Yeah. And
All
how
right.
to manage it as a commodity, we'll have someone taking that topic, I'm sure. They have the
All right.
look in their eye.
So nobody in the College Station, no ideas yet? Anybody here?
They're working on it, Gabriel. We have water
Okay.
students and we have students from the Bush School, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, you are one, and I believe we have. Are you coming from the political science? So we need to figure out. I mean, they have like a vague idea, but I'm sure they're going to come with great ideas.
Okay.
Eventually.
Well, the reason I'm asking these questions is because I want to hear from different perspectives. Because I'm going to come at it from the legal point of view, but somebody down there from the Bush School is going to come at it from some kind of politics point of view. We've got folks in Galveston, coming at it from a science management. How do you manage nuclear waste or nuclear material that reaches a river or reaches an aquifer? There's so many different ways you can address this and so many different components that you can talk about, and I want to get a sense of what people are thinking.
I'm going to be thinking about a comparative politics view, indigenous areas in the U.S., Native Americans, and how they relate to water resources and water management on U.S. and states. So I'm going to be doing it in that perspective.
There's a lot of work that has been done on that in terms of indigenous communities in different parts of the world. In Latin America, there was some really neat studies done on the trying to think what the Yanomami Indians, I think is what they're called. They were in a battle with one of the big oil companies over pollution of their water resources and their environment. So looking at how they looked at their water resources it'd be really fascinating to see and compare what their perspectives are versus some of the Native Americans or Native Canadians or other Native groups around the world. So it's really good stuff there. Good. What else? Yeah.
Where I come from, I know they're not regulating how people get their underground water. I know that a lot of people have wells, and they're not even paying for it, or they are not testing that water before using it. And we have businesses that they provide services that involve food. So I don't know if it is something that I could develop. I need to see if there's enough out there for that.
Good.
Hi. So I'm actually at the Bush School, and so I'll actually be trying to look at, or I'm going to have to come up with something, so maybe we can discuss and talk. But my concentrations are diplomacy and conflict and development. So as far as water goes, from both as conflict management and in development work, especially on an international level, that's what I'll be doing.
Excellent. And one of my particular interests is the diplomacy aspect of it. So that'd be really interesting to me. And by the way, you guys are, regardless of what schools you come from or colleges, feel free to email me or call me. I'm happy to try to brainstorm ideas, develop topics, and so on. So, any other topic ideas that people have started or are thinking about? Yeah?
Patrick wants to know if Camila learned anything in Mexico to write about. Nothing?
No response.
She's coming. Thank you for that. That was bread, right?
Yep, you're welcome.
Hey, Brett and Patrick. Hope you guys are doing well. We learned a lot while we were in Mexico, but I haven't decided if I want to do my project and research on that, but I hope that answers your question. We were in Mexico for 2 weeks. We got back on Saturday, and they decided that they would like to see my face on the camera, so I think that's why they called me out. But no, I haven't decided on my project yet. I will brainstorm something. It might be Mexico, or it might be somewhere else. I actually grew up in Puerto Rico, and Puerto Rico is also having a lot of water problems right now, so I might do that. So I haven't decided yet.
The drought.
Is that where you're from?
Yes.
Yay. Yay. Hi, Camila.
Hey, Brett.
All right, good. Well, unless anybody has anything else, I think we here in Fort Worth will sign off. Again, the purpose of this was just to get you guys thinking about all the different aspects and issues that are related to water as a problem, trying to figure out what the problem is, where you want to take it for your research problem, for your research projects. In the next couple of class sessions, we're going to deal with water as a human right, and then we're going to look at what the value of water means. And those are going to be very related, but we're going to address them separately. And then we're going to go into the other major section of the seminar, which is what most of the world does when it looks at water. It's a property issue. And so we're going to look at water as a property issue between countries, which really means sovereignty, and how countries have dealt and developed the international law in that context. So unless there's any other questions or comments, Galveston or College Station?
We are good, Gabriel. Thank you. Thank you, guys. Thank you, Galveston.